In the past few episodes, I've been focusing on the dominant 7 chord and the role it plays in the chord progression. Now we're going to start taking a broader look, using specific tunes to learn about common chord patterns. The goal is to recognize and approach the patterns as a whole rather than as a group of individual chords. We're going to start with Autumn Leaves. Now this is a great tune to work on because you can improvise effectively over the entire chord progression with a single scale, but it offers the opportunity for gradual harmonic expansion with elements that can be found in lots of other tunes as well. I'm going to discuss the harmonic form of the tune first, and then I'll get into melodic improvisation. Autumn Leaves is a 32-bar tune with an AABC form instead of the more common AABA form. That means the first 2 8-bar sections are almost the same and the last 2 are different. The chord progression shifts back and forth between major and the relative minor. In this key, the A sections start out in B flat major and wind up in G minor. The B section starts out in G minor and winds up in B flat major. The C section starts and ends in G minor with a brief modulation to E flat major in the middle of it. Each of these 3 key centers, B flat major, G minor, and E flat major, are defined by a group of chords. We'll take a look at each key center individually. The B flat major sections are defined by 4 chords, 2, 5, 1, and 4. Each one is a diatonic chord, meaning they're all derived from the 7 notes of the B flat key signature. The 2 chord is minor, the 5 chord is dominant, and the 1 and the 4 chords are major. Now you'll notice the sharp 11 in the chord symbol for the E flat major 7 chord. E flat major 7 exists as the 1 chord in the key of E flat and also as the 4 chord in the key of B flat. Adding the sharp 11 takes the harmonic function into account. An E flat major scale with a raised 4th degree or sharp 11 is called Lydian. It's a mode of the B flat major scale, which means it contains the same notes. So the sharp 11 extension ties the E flat major 7 into the key of B flat. The chord symbol might appear to be more complicated to your eye, but to your ear the sharp 11 makes sense because that note is in the key signature of the tune. Now this is often going to be the case when you see altered extensions. Although they might be non-diatonic related to the chord, they may very well be diatonic related to the key, and the key of the tune exerts an overall influence on the entire chord progression. The G minor key centers are defined by 3 chords, 2, 5, and 1 minor. The 2 chord is a minor 7 flat 5, which is also called a half diminished, and the 5 chord is a dominant 7 flat 9. The flat 5 on the 2 chord is the same note as the flat 9 on the 5 chord. That's why you often see a half diminished chord paired with an altered dominant. We call this a minor 2-5, and it is what you typically see leading to a minor 1 chord. The modulation to E flat major is defined by 5 chords, 3, 6, 2, 5, and 1. The first thing to note is that the 3 chord in E flat major is G minor, so that creates a very smooth pathway from the key center of G minor. The 6 chord is dominant, which creates a 2-5 leading to the 2 chord. We could call the 6 dominant chord 5 of 2, or in more general terms, a secondary dominant. The transition from G minor to E flat major is a good example of how modulations often occur within a chord progression. The key signature for G minor or B flat major is 2 flats. The key signature for E flat major is 3 flats. That means that 6 of the 7 notes are the same in both keys. There's only one note that's different, A natural or A flat. When you modulate up or down by an interval of a 4th or a 5th, as is the case if you're going from B flat to E flat, you arrive at a key signature that's only one note different. When you modulate up or down by a major 2nd, such as from C to B flat or C to D, you arrive at a key signature that's 2 notes different. When you modulate up or down by a minor 3rd, such as from C to A or C to E flat, you arrive at a key signature that's 3 notes different. When you modulate up or down by a major 3rd, such as from C to A flat or C to E, you arrive at a key signature that's 4 notes different. The more notes that change, the more dramatic the harmonic shift will sound. Now we'll take a look at constructing melodic lines on this chord progression. The first thing you should focus on with any tune is the melody. Like most standard tunes, the melody for Autumn Leaves is mostly diatonic. There are only 4 notes that are outside the key signature. In the A sections, all the prominent melody notes are thirds of the chords. If I play just those notes and the roots of the chords, you'll hear the basic harmony of the tune. In the next example, I'll expand on this idea by improvising with just quarter notes played against the roots. As long as I land on chord tones when the chords occur, the harmony will be clear, and this is especially true if I land on the thirds. When you're playing just one note per beat, it's pretty obvious whether you're on the money or not. The next demonstration is actually getting a little bit ahead of myself in this video, but I'll advance this another step to playing eighth note lines over the roots. Now you might not be able to keep up or understand exactly what I'm doing here, but what I want you to hear or understand is that fast lines are built on the same principles as slow lines. If you can't follow or outline the harmony at slow tempos, it's not going to happen when you're playing fast. In other words, you got to walk before you can run. Seeing a chord progression in terms of key centers gives you a zoomed-out view of a chord progression. It reduces the number of scales that you have to deal with, and it helps you to see the difference between the scales, which is really what you should focus on. The melodic strategy is to target the chord tones in each bar, following a general rule of placing chord tones on the downbeats to bring out the sound of the chord. Now this brings up a common misconception or misunderstanding, and it always comes back to the comparison between jazz improvisation and spoken language. In the early stages of learning a language, you struggle just to find the right words, so your speech is sort of halting and grammatically imperfect. As you gain fluency, though, the language becomes more precise and you're able to express your thoughts more concisely and clearly. When you speak, you don't have time to think about the rules of grammar. And when you improvise, you don't have time to think about something like putting chord tones on the downbeats. But that will happen as you become more precise in your ability to express musical thoughts. When you're learning to drive, you have to focus on the basic operation of the vehicle, like which pedal is the brake and which is the accelerator. When that becomes second nature, you become a better driver, because then you can focus on what's happening on the road instead of what's happening inside the car. The analogy is that as you become more fluent with the jazz language, you're able to focus less on what you're playing and more on what the others play. Now that doesn't happen overnight or regrettably from watching a YouTube video or reading a book. But if you can learn to drive, you can learn to improvise, and you're in less physical danger if you screw up. The bottom line message here is to keep in mind the difference between doing something consciously and doing it reflexively. So let's get back to the tune. A minor 2-5 takes us to the G minor key center. A minor 7 flat 5, or half diminished, is diatonic to the key signature, as is the Locrian scale from which it's derived. The major third of the 5 chord, however, is well outside the key signature, so that has to be taken into account by the improviser. We see something similar happen in the 8th bar when G minor changes to G dominant to take us to the C minor chord in the 9th bar. The major third of G dominant is also outside the key signature. When an important chord tone like the 3rd is non-diatonic to the key, I refer to that as a pivotal tone. Now I'll talk more about pivotal tones in an upcoming video, but the gist of it is that they stand out to the ear. The harmony seems to pivot on these notes. The key of E flat major contains one more flat than the key of B flat major, so the most important note for the improviser in this key center is A flat, which appears as the 3rd of the 2 chord and the flat 7 of the 5 chord. Now we also have a 6 dominant chord in this key center, which gives us another non-diatonic major 3rd, another pivotal tone. So now we've looked at the 3 key centers, and we've focused on how they differ, especially when we see chord tones that are outside the key signature. Targeting those notes will make improvised lines more precise, but before I do that, I want to talk about the idea of improvising diatonically using only the 7 notes of the B-flat major scale. The melody of this tune offers a clear indication that diatonic improvisation is certainly possible. There are only 4 non-diatonic notes in the entire melody, and 2 of them can be classified as chromatic approach notes. Harmonically, Autumn Leaves is also well suited to diatonic improvisation because it never veers very far from the key. That means that there will always be a substantial number of notes from the B-flat major scale to work with on any of the chords. Now you'll actually be able to improvise on most tunes using only the notes of the key signature. They're not all going to work on every chord. but you'll always be able to find at least one or two that will. Now, in some cases, they won't be the defining notes of the chord, so that makes it a little bit hard to be harmonically precise with only diatonic improvisation. But one advantage is that staying within the key can create melodic coherence, because we hear a chord progression in the context of the key. Most tunes start and end in the same key, so regardless of what happens along the way, you could say you wind up at the destination. Now, Autumn Leaves is actually an exception in that regard, in that it starts out in B-flat major and it winds up in G minor. But those two are relative major and minor keys, so they share a key signature. Restricting the melodic choice to the 7 notes of a key signature simplifies the process of improvising on this tune, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. First, there's the challenge of crafting interesting melodic lines from the same 7 notes. Now, I talked about that in these videos. As opposed to a modal tune where you're using one scale to improvise over one chord, in this case you'd be using one scale to improvise over multiple chords. In some ways that's actually a help, because the chord progression suggests melodic lines. On the other hand, it's like a shifting target, because as the chords change, you need to redefine the notes that are prominent in your melody. For someone who's fluent with the language, there are certain notes that cry out to be played. When we prohibit ourselves from playing those notes, well, that acts like a roadblock to creative thought. It's like coming up on a detour sign. When you can't go where you'd normally go, you have to find alternative routes, and they might be less efficient or effective. As an improviser, being blocked from certain notes that I instinctively want to play stops me in my tracks, and you may be able to hear when that happens. Now, one thing that helps me avoid those roadblocks is to think in terms of the key centers. Rather than thinking about the notes of a single scale and how to adapt that scale to changing chords, I'm primarily focusing on which of the 3 key centers I'm in at the moment. That helps me shape my melodic lines even within the harmonic restraints. In the next demonstration, I'm going to allow myself to play those non-diatonic chord tones that I instinctively want to play. I'm also going to allow myself the major 7 passing tone on the dominant bebop scale. I've talked a little bit about the bebop scale in previous episodes, and I'm going to go into it more in the next one. But the purpose of the passing tone is to place the chord tones on the beat, particularly when the line is descending. But again, that's a function of developing fluency with the language rather than making conscious decisions in real time. Now, there's one other scale that I'll mention, and it's something that I described in this video. It's the use of the harmonic minor scale over a minor 2/5. The G harmonic minor scale contains all the notes of the A half diminished and the D7 flat 9 chords. So I can use that single scale over the 2/5 in the G minor sections. With these few restrictions lifted, it should be easier for me to improvise, because I'm giving in to what I describe as a magnetic attraction to specific notes. One of the purposes of restricting note choice, aside from simplifying things for somebody who's just starting out, is to emphasize that magnetic attraction, to reinforce how much your ear wants to hear those notes. Once you come to grips with that, you've actually got a couple of options. You could play them, which will be satisfying to the listener. Or you could make a conscious choice not to play them, planting the suggestion of the note and letting it materialize in the ear of the listener. For the last demonstration, I'm going to allow something that I talked about in this video, the use of chromatic approach or passing notes. Now, these notes don't change the harmonic calculation, but they do provide more melodic pathways.